As the climate continues to change, political power begins to shift in West Africa, and as prices of raw cocoa begin to increase, the supply of chocolate in the global market is beginning to be threatened. At the same time, consumers' demands for chocolate today and in the future are continuing to grow at groundbreaking levels. These two forces combined may prove to compromise the future chocolate market. Consumer demands for chocolate are being led in part by the emerging economic markets of the modern global system, for example, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Latin American countries. In these places, we are beginning to see a large increase in population, and this will continue in the future. These BRIC countries accounted for 55% of global confectionery retail growth in 2011 alone. The expected large amounts of youthful populations in these areas will have increasingly high demands for sweets, especially chocolate. If chocolate output is a stock, under the basic logic of supply and demand, the increase in demand for chocolate emphasized by the growing population and economies of BRIC countries will lead to an increase in output. Utilizing Meadows' terminology, the increase in youthful populations in BRIC and in other emerging economies would be interpreted as a reinforcing feedback loop, which will help maintain the stock. In addition, one of the more modern and recent trends in food production and manufacturing has become the idea of source certification and traceability. In the chocolate market, companies like Hershey and Mars are beginning to make it completely public where they are getting their raw materials. Over the past few years, we have observed consumers who are willing to pay a higher premium for indulging in chocolate, especially if they know the origins of the cocoa. This idea has become very popular in the United States and around the world with the explosion of local farmers markets and farm stands. Another one of the main reasons consumers are increasingly willing to pay for sweets and chocolate are some of their newly discovered health benefits. Chocolate, specifically dark chocolate, has been proven to contain some antioxidants that are important for staying healthy. These antioxidants, called phenols, the same ones found in red wine, were found to prevent the bad cholesterol from causing plaque buildup in our arteries, and there is research to say that it may reduce our risk of heart disease. According to a recent study, chocolate sales growth is predicted to rise by 8% in North America in the next 5 years, with an increasingly diet-conscious United States market set to remain the food group's biggest market, accounting for 15% of sales in 2018. In addition, people looking for a fast energy burst in the middle of the day are turning to healthier, chocolate-covered granola and protein bars, as opposed to energy drinks or soda. There's even research that suggests chocolate releases endorphins and helps regulate serotonin levels in the brain, which help to subdue the effects of anxiety and depression. As we have seen throughout this course, technological innovations have been vital in the manufacturing sphere of the global system. In addition, in the modern global economic market, consumers are starting to increase their demand for customized products. This is beginning to invade the market for chocolate as well. New e-commerce departments in major chocolate firms are beginning to scan the consumer marketplace for their individual tastes and preferences so that they can create a personalized chocolate bar. These trends will increase the demand even further. In fact, the KPMG report on the future of the chocolate market says that personalization may in fact be the next consumer-driven revolution in the industry.
As a game changer in the NIC Report 2030, technological innovation has been a key feature of human and economic progress. Information and communication technologies have enabled transnational and global interactions that were impossible a few years ago. In addition, this flow has intensified globalization and has enabled a complex global supply chain of chocolate to develop and grow. Utilizing Meadows system concepts, ICTs can be seen as a reinforcing feedback loop, which help prevent the threats to the supply chain from destabilizing the cocoa and chocolate industries. Of course, this involves new difficulties for producers, like purchasing new ingredients to use in their chocolate bars, but it may be worth it. On the supply side, cocoa sourcing is a complex business which has to cope with and respond to potential risks. Among these are the increasing prices of raw materials, which depend on the prevailing market forces and supply-side risks. Threats to the supply chain can be seen as balancing feedback loops which contribute to the destabilization of the stock. These threaten the future of the complex supply chain of chocolate, and their effects could, for example, be to shift the traditional process of chocolate manufacturing to other countries. It is argued that with the rising popularity of cars in emerging markets, chocolate companies face a situation where cocoa is competing with other crops like rubber for manufacturing car tires, tracing back to the cocoa producers, which have to assess what industries will be most profitable for them to join. The supply chain of chocolate involves the growing of cocoa, cocoa processing and refining, transforming cocoa dough to the finished product, and responding to consumer demand around the world. Not only should sustainable supply growth be a priority, but quality assurance should be reinforced, especially as it becomes a more difficult task to accomplish because of the emerging complexity of the chain. The International Center for Tropical Agriculture recently released a study concluding that if Ghana and the Ivory Coast see a 2.3 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, farmers would have to consider relocating or transitioning to a new crop, the former being difficult due to the topography of West Africa, and the latter expensive and economically challenging. Difficulties in West African chocolate production could cause a supply-side decrease and a price increase in major consumer nations worldwide. The temperature increases and subsequent effects are not likely to take effect until 2050, however, allowing time for potential solutions to be investigated. Cocoa is an important cash crop that contributes 7.5% and 3.4% of GDP of the Ivory Coast and of Ghana, respectively. The Ivory Coast and Ghana together produce almost half of the world's total cocoa harvest, and it is important to ensure sustainable growth of the chocolate production and to understand the existing threats against the supply chain of chocolate, including climate change and its effects on crop productivity. The supply chain can be disrupted by many factors. Amongst these are the increasing rates of disease and pests, problems with decreasing soil fertility, or even drought. Climate change will affect the climatic suitability of main suppliers of cocoa in West Africa. This will impact both the output of cocoa, West African economies, and farmer livelihoods who are dependent on the persistence of the cocoa industry. In a recent study, predictions for 2050 estimated that there would be both an increase in average global temperature causing heat stress and an overall decrease in rainfall, which will contribute to the risk of drought. However, this model also predicts an increase in productivity in hilly regions of the Ivory Coast, leading to a shift in cocoa production as the country increases its productivity relative to Ghana. Nevertheless, an overall decrease in crop productivity will be observed.
Another important factor that affects the input prices for raw cocoa is the political backdrop of the major countries that export cocoa beans, specifically Ghana and the Ivory Coast. Regional instability in West Africa specifically has proven to have large negative effects on the supply of chocolate worldwide, but especially in European nations that rely on West African countries exclusively for their raw cocoa. For example, in early 2011, a political runoff on the Ivory Coast between the declared leader Alassane Ouattara and the incumbent Laurent Gbagbo turned into a bloody conflict that greatly affected the supply of cocoa and stability in the nation. The declared leader of the Ivory Coast imposed an export ban on cocoa to try to cut off funding for the incumbent's campaign. However, Gbagbo told exporters they had to ship at least 25% of cocoa crops or it would be seized by the government. This massive unrest sent the world into a short-term supply crisis, driving prices per metric ton of cocoa to increase to a 34-year high. In the long run, an excess demand for chocolate, in combination with the newly emerging threats to supply, may prove to be a system trap. Solutions to the supply threats can include a focus on farmer training activities, the investment in research activities and innovations, and the strengthening of farmer organizations. This will help prevent farmers from exiting the chocolate industry, as cocoa farming is still seen as a potential option for smallholder farmers who attempt to lift themselves out of poverty. Also, given that more places in the Ivory Coast will be more suitable than places in Ghana due to climate change, provides the system with a place to intervene. This intervention will help the system become self-organizing, and the growing of the cocoa bean is likely to shift to the Ivory Coast. On the other hand, adapting to a drier climate could involve changing management practices by planting cocoa trees at wider intervals in order to reduce their water needs per unit area. However, this requires more land space, which is expensive in terms of the cost of the land, in terms of the initial low per hectare yields, and in terms of the increased weed control, which would have to take place. Moreover, addressing disease-related issues would involve the complete destruction of infected cocoa plants, which smallholder farmers cannot afford to risk having to do. With regards to quality assurance, it is crucial to undergo quality checks and perhaps being close to origin countries, as the control begins with the cocoa bean itself. Perhaps global cocoa companies should promote direct sourcing, whereby cocoa companies are more directly involved in the chocolate process in order to ensure the sustainability, quality, and livelihood of the industry. Getting local governments to subsidize farmers to prevent them from leaving the industry and to ensure a sufficient level of output would serve as a place to intervene in which the government would be attempting to alter the structure of the system. This change of structure and rules in the system is consistent with one of Fratantuano's pillars of system analysis. Furthermore, having local presences in emerging brick markets and in other markets where there is a strong demand for chocolate may be beneficial for the companies. This way, demand can be responded to quickly and problems associated with the purchase of agricultural products such as sugar and dairy can be avoided. These goods are not traded globally, but are sold on local markets which are often protected by import quotas and tariffs. Hence, local presence in demanding economies is bound to be more efficient and cost-effective. In conclusion, the chocolate industry needs resilience to overcome these threats to the system. The rich structure of many feedback loops may work in different ways to restore the system even after large perturbations.